Hi there, this is Chuck Rosansky, and I'm here in my Pueblo Treasures Museum in Denver, Colorado. And this is the third in a series of reels that I'm doing that kind of give you a sense of what the Pueblo Treasures Museum is about and why it exists. And I've been thinking a lot about this because I've been getting great feedback from people saying that they really like the videos and they like seeing the various pottery. But I think that what's equally important and that I really want to emphasize is that the Pueblo Treasures Museum is being put together as a research collection. And so it's not nearly so much a collecting endeavor as it is trying to fill in the gaps endeavor so that I can learn more things and other people coming here can learn things. And so today I want to cover one little subject which is polychrome pottery in the American Southwest. Now in central Mexico and actually going down to the Peruvian coast, polychrome pottery was ubiquitous going back 2,000, 3,000 years. They were making tons of polychrome pottery in the central Mexican area, well, southern Mexican area, the Chupicuaro pottery, and I have a whole bunch of that down there. So that's 2,000, 2,500 years old, and they really had pottery down pat. But in the American Southwest, it took a long time for pottery to get going. You ended up with initially some stuff called Alma Brown, which was just barely tempered kind of utilitarian ware. Sometimes it was even just the inside of a basket where they would take a basket and then line it with clay. And sometimes then the pottery form would survive, but it'd have these really cool basket weave outlines on the outside of it. But around the year 1150, maybe a little bit earlier, in the American Southwest, they started going from just the black and white pottery, like the Mimbres pottery, or the Mogollon brown pottery, and they started using colored slips. And so these pieces here, these are all pre-contact pieces, which is prior to Columbus, 1492. So these are all 500 years old or older, but there's a whole bunch of different types. So you have the Salado types, you have the White Mountain Redware types, and then you have like the Proto-Hopi types. And if you take a look, these have all got a red background, and then they're embellished with black, sometimes with black outlined in white. And so you've got these different color schemes going on. And then you get into things like this, which are very unusual because they took the red, put the white on the inside of it, and then did use both the white and the red to create the image. And so that's really cool. But what I was thinking about last night was Santa Clara Pueblo, because I will show you a plate that I got in yesterday that just sort of got me to thinking. I really like big Santa Clara platters, and even if they have a little bit of wear on them, I don't mind. I especially like this sort of weak slate blue that they used. I call it weak because if you take a look, even putting the slip on fairly thickly, it still showed some of the red underneath. And so it wasn't a great slip. But I have the inverse of this. Here they used the negative space to actually create the avenue, and the positive space is taken up with this blue that's outlined in white. Well, the outlined in white is actually a continuation of what they were doing way back in the 11, 12, 13, 1400s down in the central Arizona area and bleeding over into extreme western New Mexico. But I got to thinking, when did polychrome start to appear at Santa Clara, because I have a lot of Santa Clara pottery, plus or minus 2,000 pieces, which is more than a lot of museums put together, a lot of public museums. And in that collection of Santa Clara pottery, it occurred to me that there was sort of a timeline when polychrome started to appear. Now, what's important about this is that Santa Clara and San Ildefonso are right next to each other, just to the north of Espanola, to the south of Espanola, to the north of Santa Fe. So you got two communities right next to each other, and around the year 1900, they were making lots and lots of polychrome pottery at San Ildefonso, but at Santa Clara, everything was black. I think they had some reds, and they had some pieces that were the micaceous clay that they were trading from the Taos Indians. Let's go over here and take a look at what they were doing at San Ildefonso. The earliest San Ildefonsos, they were doing them with, like this one here, where they had the red just as a very slight embellishment. This particular piece is by Marianita Roybal, and she was the first Pueblo potter that we know of to sign a piece, and I think she signed it in about 1880. It was given as a gift to the territorial governor at that time. But Marianita Roybal was doing a lot of sort of a gray slip with red outlines. Same here. This is sort of, here she did a brown. So here it's just black and sort of this tan. I don't think that's native clay polished. Native clay polished is a slightly different color, because the, if you take a look here, this is probably native clay here from Santa Clara. And what native clay means is that they didn't put a slip on it. They didn't actually put something above the native clay. This red line is called a Carrizan band. And even though San Ildefonso is a Tewa Pueblo, they still occasionally did that Carrizan band. But if you take a look at what's in this case, now take a look here. This is a San Ildefonso piece. This is one of the rarest pieces of Pueblo pottery in the entire world. So this is what's called an Ogie Pogie polychrome. And Linda Cordell, who wrote the book Southwestern Pottery, or Southwestern Archaeology, excuse me, was the director of the University of Colorado Museum, and I took this up to her. And she and I talked about it for a long time, because one of my heroes is Earl Morris, and Earl Morris was the initial director. He founded the museum at the University of Colorado. Now, Earl, in his career, found either 3 or 4 Ogie Pogie polychromes, but they were all broken. And blessedly, his mom, believe it or not, was a great restorer, and his mom put those together, and they have them in the University of Colorado Museum. That's the largest collection of Ogie Pogie polychromes in the world. Okay, I have 2 of them here in the Pueblo Treasures Museum. This one is the only unbroken one in the world. And that's what makes it so rare. Linda dated this to right after de Vargas conquered Black Mesa. It was found in a dry cave on a private ranch in Gobernador Canyon up by Farmington, New Mexico. But take a look here. You've got your kind of cream gray background, then your black outline, but then you have this red band in here. So they were doing that kind of polychrome pottery at San Ildefonso, going all the way back into at least the 1700s, early 1700s. But then they started getting much more elaborate. This is a Maria Julian piece here, where Julian did black, but then he did his embellishment with that sort of burnt red orange. This is a Marie and Julian polychrome cornmeal box. And again, you see your different colors there. But then the question that I ask, and this is the whole point about this being a research collection, these kinds of things bedevil me. So what happened? Why? Let's go back down here a second. Why did they have all of this polychrome pottery that was being made at San Ildefonso in the 1880s, 1890s, 1900 period? And listen to this. In the census for the year 1900, San Ildefonso was down to just barely above 100 people. So many people had either died or had relocated because there were no economic opportunities at the Pueblo, that almost nobody lived there. Think about that number again. 100 people were all that was left at San I, and of them, about 8 or 9 of them were really outstanding potters, and that's why they were producing just magnificent pieces. Again, this is a Marie and Julian polychrome here, and it's just astounding, absolutely astounding. But next door, right next door to San I mean, they border on each other. You could, shoot a gun from the Santa Clara Plaza and hit San I. They did no polychrome. And this is something that has just been bedeviling me since I figured it out. It's like, who started it? How did this begin? So, like most good researchers, I went back to my books. And, if you take a look here, you can see this is sort of typical Santa Clara ware. And Santa Clara, by the way, still had 800 people in the 1900 census. So Santa Clara was much, much larger than San I. But they were so used to just making this straight black ware that they just weren't changing. But then there was some guys, and I'm pretty sure it was guys. I don't think it was the women, because the guys a lot of times would do the decorating. The women would do the sculpting. They would do the potting, and they would fire the pots. But then, if there was carving to be done, or if they were going to use the tuff and the volcanic tuff and use that to do designs like Julian did, again, it was almost always the men that were doing that. So let's go over here into my office. This is where, this is all Santa Clara right here, except for the Acamas that are in the center. You can tell the ones that are not Santa Clara because the only Santa Claras that are in here that have color are those two 1930s, that match set of candle holders right there. Everything else is Acama. I think those are all Acama. Yeah, Acamas. But this is your typical Santa Clara jar from 1880, 1890, 1900. This would have been a larger one for storage in the house, or where you would pour your water from the ones that they would carry in on their heads, where they would have the typical water jars. And these were never used as water jars, but because these were made for the tourist trade, but these were made by Serafina Tafoya. And so you've got some of your micaceous pieces, and you've got the Santa Clara, the really early Pohogi polychrome, which is a transitional between Ogie-Pogie polychrome and modern ware. And the Pohogi polychrome was just that gray on black. And so Santa Clara went from gray on black to just straight black to this riot of colors. This is about a 1940 jar by Van Gutierrez. And so I've been puzzling this out. How did they do that? When did they switch? Because if you come over here, you can see that early on, all the older pieces the seminal pieces are all just black. Just black. And then this piece right here, I'm going to have Doug give you a little bit of a close-up on that one. That is a very large water jar that's painted by Manuel Tafoya. And I know it was painted by Manuel Tafoya because he had a certain slip color, a purple slip color. I call it Manuel's lavender, actually. And so you can pretty much tell Manuel's work, but he never signed. The only time he signed was for his mom, Serafina Tafoya, and so some of the cornmeal boxes and things like that I have are signed by Manuel, but they're signed Serafina. Go figure. But over here, this collection of polychrome pieces from the Gutierrez family. So this is all painted by Van. This entire showcase are pieces painted by Van. Most of them are polychrome. They did a few blacks just to prove that they could, I guess. And then there were a very few. I just got a third one in, and these are just rare as heck. Come on in closer here, Doug, and get a little picture of that orange Avanu right there. So they started doing orange on black, and from what I've read, they only did it for about a year. And it's believed to be a commercial paint, but to the best of my knowledge, no one's ever tested it. So it could be some sort of slip, because Van got these slips, and you've got to see these. I mean, there are some of Van's pieces that have 13 colors. There's a cornmeal box that's in the Autry Museum in Los Angeles, has 13 colors. But you can see here where he's got the dark slate, the really kind of burnt umber here. There's the lavender. Well, this is important to know because Manuel Tafoya lived right by and was friends with Van Gutierrez. And so Van started doing non-black pottery after he married Leela. And as near as I can tell, he started the pottery in the early 20s, 1922, 23, something like that. But take a look. This black pottery, if they would not have taken the oxygen away at the end of the firing, which is called a reduction process, if they would not have done reduction firing with this, it would still be red. Because when they first make a pot at Santa Clara, they form it and they sand it, and then when they put the slip on, it's an iron oxide rich slip that is red. And so this color that you see in the background on all of these Van Gutierrez pots, that red is actually the color that these were before they were put into a non-oxygen environment during the firing, and then that causes a chemical composition change that turns them black, okay, which is really cool. But it begs the question of who at Santa Clara decided that they were going to stop doing exclusively black and that they were going to start morphing into more of these rainbow colors. What made it really cool, Van had to go out by himself and find all these slip colors. There's a genius recreator out of Tucson by the name of Andy Ward, and he does a lot of videos, and Andy's videos are fantastic. But one of the things he shows is going out and finding clay, taking it back to his where he does his work. I want to call it his laboratory, and firing these clays and seeing how they turn out. A lot of them are crap, but through trial and error, Andy has figured out different slip colors, and my favorite one that he does is where he gets different kinds of red ochre and compares those, because red is super important and sacred within the Pueblo world. But anyway, Van went out with his old truck, and he found clay beds in the neighborhood of Santa Clara, or maybe even further out, that would fire these different colors. And he didn't know anything about potteries. He had a first wife. He was born like 1882 or something like that. He had a first wife. She died. So he married this younger woman, Leela, She made pottery, but needed somebody to decorate it. Van started doing this stuff. But I don't think that he did it in isolation. I think that he was working with Manuel Tafoya, and Manuel had a brother-in-law, Alcario. And Alcario was Margaret Tafoya's husband. And I think the three of them, and maybe Margaret herself was involved in all of this, decided that they were going to start using these slip colors and creating these magnificent painted works. Now, if somebody out there knows of someone who was creating painted works earlier than, say, 1922, because if you take a look at this, these are lamps. The two cream on red, they've only got the two colors. Actually, I take it back. There's three colors. Because if you look real carefully, the mesas inside the Evanyo are a slightly different slip color than the body of the Evanyo. But there you've got, and this is very unusual for Santa Clara, these are outlined in black. Santa Clara pottery, generally, when you're looking like over here, always outlined in white. Van flipped things. And take a look here. He's outlining in black. He's got a what's called a framing line, but it's a double framing line, which is like what they were doing on those White Mountain polychromes that I showed you right at the beginning of this video. This stuff is crazy. It's like you really want to try and figure out who did this, how, why. Okay, I'm going to stop. This is too long. But what I was trying to illustrate is that this collection exists because I can walk over here and I can point and I can say, well, look at this and this and this and this and this. And over here I got this and this and blah, blah, blah. That's the point of a research collection. As you can probably tell, I live in a kind of, I haven't got enough room here for the museum. So I live in a state of kind of barely controlled chaos. But at the same time, this allows me to try and think things through and walk from one side of the room to the other side of the room and try and get a sense of perspective and try to figure out what was going on. But I can tell you that in the early 1920s, there was a blossoming at Santa Clara where suddenly they picked up on the fact, I think this was a mercantile decision, they picked up on the fact that the tourists were buying the stuff from their neighbors, San I, hand over fist, and their black was kind of maybe a little slower to sell. And they said, well, let's try something different, because they're not dumb people. They're very smart. And so I think Van Gutierrez, he marries Lila, their stuff isn't selling, and he says, hey, try this. And here, I'll leave you with this final thing. I became so enamored of Van Gutierrez's work. This case right here holds more Van Gutierrez pieces than all the museums in America put together. Period. That's just a flat statement. Okay? But I was the first one to figure out, and this was in a dream. I had a dream vision, one of those things where you wake up at 4:30 in the morning and the birds are chirping and you're not really awake, but you're not asleep. I had a dream vision that Van was using this tan background that he used on so ubiquitously on so many of his pieces, and that it was supposed to represent human skin. And so I went to his daughter and I asked Margaret, do you think I could use some of your dad's art as body art? Because I said, I think on some levels, that's what this was supposed to represent. And she said, sure, you're crazy. But she said, go ahead. And so Manuel, Alcario, Margaret Tafoya, Van. This was the birth of an entire art form transition. But there's so much more. I know there's more I've got to learn. And I'm pretty sure that after I post this video, that somebody out there is going to make me aware of something that I wasn't aware of. But that's the whole point. I don't try to come across as being the know-it-all. Far from it. Every single day, I learn a little bit more about the hows and whys of this beautiful, incredibly evocative art form. That's why the Pueblo Treasure Museum exists. I'm Chuck Rosansky. My museum is open to visit. Go to the first in this series. This is number 3. Go to the first in this series of reels, and I give all the details on how to get a hold of me and to arrange a visit here and take a look at some of these pieces yourself. Thanks, and have a really good one.